Thanks, Kevin, for coming on the podcast. I'm so excited to chat to you. Before we get stuck into, I have a ton of questions for you. I've been diving deep down the rabbit holes of technique. You also have a technique principles ebook, which I'm really keen to check out. But can you share with us your experience with Javelin and your coaching background with track sports, and I guess your own experiences before we get too far down this stuff?
Yeah, totally. I'm a former collegiate javelin thrower. I threw Division 1 at the University of Connecticut. I've been throwing since freshman year of high school. My personal best is 72 meters, which that's like a high level throw for Division 1. It's a little bit off of what like you would throw for professional level. So after I graduated school, um, I ended up getting into coaching. My collegiate career was riddled with injuries. I had elbow surgery, I had 2 hip surgeries, just chronic back problems. So one of my biggest missions when I graduated was to kind of figure that all out. I was on the fence about continuing throwing, but I jumped right into coaching, kind of digging into just some of the new school like trainers like ATG, Darian Barr, a lot of Just Fly Sports stuff, Joel stuff from Just Fly, just really going down the rabbit holes to try to figure out like, all right, why did I fail at every conceivable goal I set because of injuries? And the biggest thing that stuck out was mobility. Um, so once I started coaching javelin, I just kind of kept on going down that rabbit hole. So it's been basically 5 years now since I started coaching, started learning about all this stuff, and just applying it all into a system that makes sense and that works. As a javelin coach, I feel like I'm lucky in the sense that javelin gives me a lens to sort through some of the nonsense rather than a lot of the right. If you're just in the fitness industry, you kind of get caught in these circular conversations of, you know, I'm right, you're wrong because of X, Y, Z, but everybody's a little bit right and everybody's a little bit wrong because they don't have the context that they're applying it to. So I feel like what I've been able to do is just kind of take the principles of javelin throwing and just kind of the demands that you face in a throwing sport, lots of extreme range of motion, lots of right high stress impact, and just kind of apply mobility into that framework. And that's just kind of opened up even more rabbit holes. So that's kind of been what I've been working on. Is just coaching javelin throwers while also kind of just figuring out how throwing works in general. So uh, my biggest things right now I work on my javelin athletes, but I also offer like a mobility program that right. I'm just trying to apply everything possible to just help throwers of all different sports, whether it's baseball, cricket, javelin, just get better at throwing and staying healthy while they do it.
So is this something that with your own knowledge and with your own experience that blends, you can blend it quite well into like the weight room, or are these separate sessions? How have you kind of designed your model around that? And so people don't have to spend like hours doing this stuff, like, and then actually see the benefits of mobility and stretching, like so that these effects are more long lasting. I know when people talk about, well, if you have to keep doing an intervention, it doesn't really work, but you have to keep doing everything for it to keep working. Like it doesn't.
Right.
That's such a bullshit statement. Yeah,
Yeah.
so I'm really interested to see how you kind of blend it all together.
Yeah. So I think the kind of two different areas to touch on there. First is uh, we place so much emphasis on the weight room as being like the holy grail of athletic performance. But I think there's a really big argument to be made that flexibility or just having movement capacity, because that's the other thing I'm going to touch on in a second, but flexibility is equally as important. Relaxation and positioning, right? Being able to um, just capture energy through angles and alignment and being able to integrate that into kind of like a relaxed speed and acceleration, like that's all just as important as raw neuromuscular rate of force development. So I think people kind of get hung up on that. They say, well, I don't want to waste all this time doing flexibility, but that's kind of like a dumb starting point for the argument anyway. It's like what you need to focus on is doing what you need to do to get better at your sport. And we need to open the door to include flexibility in that conversation. The second big part is when I think about mobility, that's kind of like the umbrella term that I'll use just for developing movement capacity. And movement capacity includes strength and flexibility and elasticity and motor control and coordination and kinesthetic intelligence. So it's like all this stuff is just kind of wrapped up under mobility. I kind of just say mobility, it represents just like the intrinsic infinite possibility of human movement, right? We have feet, knees, hips, spine with many vertebrae, scapula, shoulders, and they can all get into tons of different positions in various contexts in, you know, solving different movement problems or in different sports. So when you frame it from the perspective of there is no separating strength and flexibility, it just comes down to movement capacity. Can you get into a certain position under a certain load? Or put even more simply, I like to just say, what is the thing that you want to do? Throw a javelin, throw a baseball, do a snatch, hang snatch. What is the thing you want to do? And can you do it? Are you physically capable of doing it? Yes or no? That's mobility. So then from that perspective, now you've kind of created this context of what am I actually training my movement capacity for, right? What joints do I need to train to do what specific things, range of motion, strength, you know, whatever qualities you need to train. And then your program revolves around that. So to me, it's kind of framing it as, you know, well, how do I manage my time better doing flexibility training with strength training? It's like, no, just put it all into a program, however you need to do it. Maybe you'll cut your lifting volume in half to focus on flexibility, or maybe you'll integrate everything into, you know, quote unquote strength through length exercises like the ATG kind of stuff, Jefferson curls and ATG split squats. But it just depends, totally just depends on what you need and what you're training for and where you're starting from.
Yeah, that's such a good point. How you kind of like blend it all together, or try and, I think a lot of people will maybe go, oh yeah, well maybe we try and strengthen this position, and then you end up kind of shortening and stiffening that area. I think with something like, say, the javelin, there's nothing in the program that they're going to do, or nothing in their training that's going to be more savage than throwing that spear 70 meters. So you kind of want to have, is within that javelin session, is that where you're saying, cool, well, like like to think about like that symphony of high and low, or those complementary pairs, like having something really stiff and like a powerful concentric movement. Then will you, in that same session, in their throwing session, will you get them to do, get them into more of a flex position after? Is that how you're kind of pairing these two things together, or is that just throughout the week, as long as they fit it in, it doesn't really matter?
Yeah, so the way I think about it is the technical sessions will always revolve just around very specific javelin technical concepts, and the physical preparation is where you really think about kind of what you're describing, balancing out the high load versus low load, balancing out different joint positions. And so the main way that I think about balancing this out isn't necessarily in terms of like the ebb and flow of, you know, a normal periodization scheme, but it's just about long-term adaptation that we're striving for. So some athletes, when they're just starting out, they're not necessarily it's not that they're not necessarily, you know, quote unquote ready for this like high load stuff, like let's just say like a loaded Jefferson curl, just as a random example. But there's just better starting points, and meeting athletes where they're at with this long-term vision of progression, to me, is like the most underrated like programming concept that most people ignore. It's like most people start in this like no man's land middle ground where it's like you're just giving athletes like squats and power lifts and Olympic lifts and random med ball throws. but they never really spend the time to develop this, just say like isolated joint range of motion and strength. Almost like the FRC model of mobility, just really, really isolated joint strength and range of motion gets ignored so much. And as a result, that middle ground of like squats, power lifts, Olympic lifts suffers a little bit. And then the next component of that is a lot of people just kind of stay in that middle ground and never progress to, the extreme positions, whether that's like extreme range dips or Jefferson curls or splits or back bridges, like you name it, like all the quote unquote extreme stuff. People are afraid of that, but they're only afraid of that because they skipped that initial phase of developing isolated joint mobility. So we do too much initially, but then we don't really go far enough. And to me, I think viewing progression from that lens, it almost removes this need for it doesn't remove the need for balance, but it's just a different perspective of, right, just taking, a step by step process from the very, very minimum of what the athlete, of meeting the athlete where they're at, and just getting and building, their movement capacity to whatever that end goal is, to prepare beyond the demands of what the sport is requiring.
That's why I love watching track athletes train or do Olympic lifts in general, or just any training, because it just looks like they just take everything to the next level. And in order to throw, you said like 90 meters is Olympic level, or like getting into the high 80s. In order to do that, you're probably going to have to do something that most people can't do. But then for a lot of coaches, or even I think about myself, like how I've coached in the past, we kind of do like you said, we do our intermediate lifters, or our intermediate athletes, the biggest disservice, because we don't actually know how to take them to or carry them through to that next level. They kind of they do stay in that middle ground where, okay, we'll just keep adding load. We might do another constraint. We might just like, my favorite one is, I'm doing high volume. It's like, fucking hell, you don't need to do high volume. If anything, I'm like, let's do less. And let's like, I hate this, like, people probably hate me for this, but it's like, let's do quality volume. So tell me about like this starting point. What is this? Is that something that you try and is that something you've been trying to work on, trying to create a good foundation for people when they're first coming to you from Javelin? Because I can't imagine, like, I don't know how popular Javelin is here, but I know like some of my clients do I think it's decathlon where they do javelin or heptathlon where they have to do javelin inside that.
Yeah.
So like some of them might be like cross event athletes, or they might also do there might be a jumper and they might do a little bit of throwing as well. So what's like, some of them aren't that they don't look like throwers. They don't have the mobility, or they don't have the ability. You said, you talked about this a lot, and I know I'm bouncing around now, but getting into that layback position, that's like that position where you are getting quite stretched out, and that arm looks like it's gonna, like that forearm or that elbow has like a lot of torsion through it. So like, to get someone ready to do something like that, what's the preparation in the beginning for that like?
Yeah, so that's where you really have to just break it down, where you look at an extreme position like the layback, and right, that position in itself doesn't make sense when you just look at it. It's like, how does his arm bend like that? But when you break it down, it's like, okay, well, you need shoulder external rotation, you need scapular retraction and posterior tilt, you need thoracic spine extension, you need hip internal rotation, you need to be able to drop your knee to the ground to have quote unquote vertical femur, and just create this power C position. And when you break it down, you realize there's actually nothing extreme about that position. It's just we very rarely see every joint working in synergy to get into that extreme. But it's the same thing as a back bridge. It's like, your body's capable of bending backwards, same way as your body's capable of bending forwards. So when you frame it like that, that starting point that I see missing so frequently is, just to be really specific, I think a lot of people skip building hip rotation. A lot of people skip spinal segmentation, and a lot of people ignore just kind of like general like basic athleticism almost, of just body awareness, really fundamental like foot stiffness, ankle stiffness, um, just kind of creating this base of support to be able to know where your body is in space. And when you develop that, a lot of other things kind of come together. You become a better mover in general. But I think that the major starting point is just like, you know, we live in the 21st century where, right, if you're a collegiate athlete, you're sitting in class for 8 hours a day. You have stiff hips, right? We spend a lot of our time just like texting or watching TV on our phones. You're gonna be hunched over a lot. You're gonna be a little stiff in your back too. So just kind of taking everything into consideration, it's like the hips and the spine need so much more love than we give them in like general with our training. But especially as throwers, when you break down what is that layback position made of, you're toast if you can't segment your spine, right? I was toast in college because I had the stiffest back of all time. I couldn't rotate my hips, but I was doing a sport that was forcing me to do it anyway. And so I ended up with 3 surgeries as a result of that. So that's kind of like the basic starting point is just building that basic joint movement capacity, right? Ido Portal says it really well, where he says, first you're a human, second you're a mover, and then third you're a specialist. And you can kind of say, first you're a human, second you're an athlete, third you're a javelin thrower. So that's kind of the way that I think about it. It's just like you can't be athletic until you have functioning feet, knees, hips, spine, shoulders. You can't be a javelin thrower until you have some basic foundation of just basic coordination and athleticism, which you'd be surprised at how many people lack that, even at like the collegiate Division 1 level of throwing.
Is that do you think because a lot of people expect that just by throwing heaps that it'll just emerge on its own, where you, like you said, if there's these stages of development and this layback position that to throw 90 meters just isn't going to emerge on its own unless you encourage it with this style of training? Like people just expect, like, I'm just going to like, tell me the cue. Like, what's the cue? Like, is there a common cue that people use in javelin? Like in weightlifting, it's like stay over the bar. It's like, if you miss it, it's like, no, you didn't stay over the bar long enough. Like, that's just like the one that they parrot.
Yeah, no, it's throw over the top,
Throw
stay
over the
low,
top.
stay
Okay.
tall, which is hilarious because when the position you're describing is literally the opposite of over the top, right?
Yeah, that
But
doesn't sound.
yeah, but yeah, so that's a major issue. It's just that people don't see the link between physical preparation and technique. The same body that does the work in the weight room is your same body that is throwing off of the javelin runway. If it doesn't work well in the weight room, you can't hit a position in a stretch. If you can't hit a position in a lift, you're not going to hit it running full speed down the runway. Just isn't going to happen. And so for a lot of athletes, when I explain that to them, it's this like massive breakthrough moment where they start to realize that. But it's like weight training. If you just think about what we do in the weight room, you would never imagine there's a connection to javelin throwing, because how can you see the connection between a squat or a deadlift and a javelin throw? And so, you know, when athletes start working through, just like even like my mobility program, they start doing these positions that actually they see the resemblance. They see, oh, a back bridge is like the layback position. Oh, the thrower stretch is like the block position. The side split is like the crossovers, and it just starts making sense in their head. Um, and they just start to see that progression more. But for the most part, athletes just it doesn't, it's not ever explained to them that they need to develop those. And so if they don't know, they don't know. That's, you just have to like have that exposure to the idea before you actually start understanding that.
Do you think that that's also because there's a huge emphasis on like strength and conditioning on like metrics and just like we got to increase the force metrics, we got to increase like the impulses, we got to like there's all these metrics that they're like the force plate data, we got to see where that's at, and as long as we're increasing rate of force development, we're going to see the transfer. But that's like that's that kind of training is so general, it's not at all specific to what these throwers need. So do you think like do you have different metrics that you have for your athletes? You're like, I want you to be able to hit this stretch, or this is my kind of like arbitrary progression model, but still extremely useful because you're going to be in these more specific positions that's actually going to see that transfer. Because I feel like a lot of people, I think transfer and sports specificity is still really important. And I don't like as much as people can just get generally better and generally stronger if they haven't done something, but you still need to have that lens where it's like, well, everything we're doing in the gym, we want it to translate. We want you to be able to throw better because of this, or we want you to be able to lift faster because of this. Is that something you have kind of identified for yourself?
Yeah, 100%. So just going back to, we were kind of talking about this in the beginning, but the difference between like strength and flexibility, in my eyes, so many coaches get caught up in the metrics of strength, which is the quantitative side of performance, but flexibility to me is kind of like the qualitative side of performance. And the qualitative side of, right, technique or your technical model, that's not just for show, right? There's a lot of, we don't learn about it in our exercise science classes, but the leverage of your bones in different positions and the stretch reflex it causes and the alignment and the angles make massive differences in your throwing performance. We can't measure them the same way that we can measure, some VBT, bench press or something, but it has a massive impact on performance. So when you ignore that, you're ignoring 50% of the side of training transference. And if you only focus on that quantitative side without the qualitative side, you're just getting better at being worse. You're going to make marginal gains. Sure, you'll gain a centimeter here or a meter there, but you can transform yourself as an athlete, completely become a different, unrecognizable thrower if you address these big rock opportunities of improvement from flexibility or just movement capacity. For me, the way that the metrics that I kind of measure, they're not necessarily metrics, but I have 6, call them benchmark positions that I use, which is the back bridge, the toe touch stretch, standing toe touch stretch, stretch that I call the thrower stretch, which is kind of it's a rip off of Ido Portal's diagonal stretch, but you just have your feet straight as if you're throwing. And then I have a dead hang, and then, which includes skin the cats also, like hang variations include skin the cat, and then the front split and side split. And between all of those, they just represent these extreme joint positions that you're going to see in a javelin throw. So it's not necessarily about you need to, hit this specific depth in this specific stretch, but it's, are you better now than you were a month ago? Do you feel like you're getting deeper? Do you feel like you're moving easier? Can you control it better? My athletes will take progress pictures so they can literally see holy crap, I couldn't get into a back bridge at all, 2 weeks ago, and now I'm actually in a back bridge. So that's really my main metric I'll look for in terms of mobility and positionings in terms of transference to the throw. But weight room metrics, I kind of feel the same way, where I don't necessarily, I have basic, strength standards, right, you're going to keep seeing improvement in your throw if you're working up to a 315-pound squat. You should be able to bench press at least 2 plates. You should be able to deadlift 4 plates. And you don't want to chase too far beyond those numbers. You don't even want to chase to those numbers. You just want to keep developing to that point. And you want to do it in a holistic way where you're not doing it at the expense of your range of motion and your general athleticism. So that is just kind of the strength side of things. And then with javelin throwing stuff, the biggest metric that I track is just, right, different throwing distances and different drills, right? That's the easiest metric to understand is, right, if you're not getting better at throwing, then, what are you doing? That's what actually matters. So it's easy to get lost in the sauce as a strength coach or a mobility guy. You got to get into this position or that position, but it's in the end, it's how far you throw. So, and that's another thing where it's having the lens of javelin as the thing that filters out so much nonsense, it's really, really helpful. Because it's either you're getting better or you're not.
Yeah, that's that final part there. So with the you mentioned like you've had a few surgeries. Do you want to get into that, and then how you've been able to help your athletes create a really balanced program by approaching it like this? And then I want to touch on like some variations for javelin. I'm quite interested to hear about that.
Yeah, so my surgeries that I had Tommy John surgery my freshman year of college. That surgery, uh, I mean, it really came down to just I didn't understand how to manage like arm health in the bigger picture of just like throwing and stuff. Completely ignored arm pain throughout high school, throughout my first season in college. I played baseball at the same time that I was throwing javelins. I was just like destroying
Kevin,
my arm.
dude.
Yeah.
So for those who don't know, Tommy John, that's the medial part of the elbow, the UCL. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah,
It's the inside of your elbow, the UCL.
yeah.
So I snapped that my freshman year of college. And the big lesson I learned from that is literally just you have to learn to listen to your body. Like you have to, right? It's never worth pushing through arm pain because those 3 extra reps you get aren't going to turn you into the Olympic javelin thrower, but they might cause you to lose a year of throwing and put you through a surgery and rehab. So just understanding risk reward is so underrated. The next 2 surgeries I had were I had torn both of my labrums in my hips as a result of FAI, which is like a bony overgrowth in your hip. So I had the arthroscopic surgery to trim down the bone, repair my labrums. That one was really kind of like my first. That was when I first started understanding the importance of mobility because literally overnight, I went from not being able to rotate my hips because of a literal physical block to now that block is no longer there. And I could suddenly feel what it is like to rotate your hips. And I was like, it was just like a new position was unlocked in my brain and body. And it was this like, light bulb moment where I was like, oh, like this exists. I didn't realize that my hips could do that. And through that, I just through the rehab process, once I was back into throwing, I realized like that range of motion that I was missing, kind of, having that range of motion after the surgery unlocked so much fluidity in my movement that I never had before. So when an athlete doesn't have hip internal rotation, whether it's from a bony block or not, it's the same concept. You're going to be stiff, you're going to be rigid. The hips have trickle down effects and trickle up effects into your entire body. So I had chronic back pain throughout college too. Like I was literally the guy before the biggest meet of my life. I bent down to pick up a water bottle and just blew out my back. Like awful, awful back spasms. And it's like, I was that guy. And it's because I just didn't have any flexibility, mobility, range of motion just throughout my entire body. So that was really like, that was my big experience of just like, you have to train this stuff, right? I had FAI, but it's like, I'm sure if I had, thought about this stuff way, way, way earlier in my career, right, I never would have faced these issues. And even if I did, I just would have been so much better equipped to handle it, not dig myself into that hole where it just, it required such an extensive surgery recovery, just such a big process.
And that rehab process, is that where you started to think about like whilst you were recovering from what happened first? Was the Tommy John happened first and then the hips? Is that right?
Mhm.
So then
Yeah.
whilst you were, did things start to change for you when you were recovering from the elbow surgery? You started to thinking about, okay, well, how can I, maybe, well, one maybe was like load management side of things, maybe just don't throw with the dead arm. And then the second thing was with the hip rotation, were you thinking, okay, well, maybe there's something that I'm not doing in my program or that I could have done better? Or when did that kind of, I don't want to say penny drop, but when did that change in mindset around improving your training to be a better thrower, a better athlete really happen?
Yeah, after I blew out my elbow my freshman year, that was kind of like the wake up call. Because I was just on the back of just a whole crazy freshman year in general, and that was just the final thing that is the wake up call. I had to change a lot of things at that point, and just understanding that uh, there are intelligent ways to train. I had found a lot of awesome coaches through that freshman year online, like Just Fly Sports. I found his website freshman year. I found Jump Science, Daniel Back from Jump Science. I found him freshman year. I was actually like messaging them, just like asking them questions, and they gave me a lot of awesome ideas for training, and it kind of just like ignited this passion for just realizing like training isn't just a thing you do. It's actually this like awesome puzzle that you can solve and put together with really tangible results. So that was kind of like that was the big turning point for me. But then the hips, that was like specifically realizing that it's like your body is your sport. You don't have a career if you don't have a body. And that was when I got a lot more serious about mobility and flexibility and going down those rabbit holes, which ultimately led me to finding like ATG, Jeff Wolf, Lucas Aaron, just a lot of really smart coaches who do this stuff. Ido Portal and Adarian Barr, just awesome, awesome coaches who just like do things differently.
And as we were saying earlier, it's more like we said like it do things differently, and it was like just not have the same position for everything. Like just explore other, like really the basic premises and those principles is not live in the same positions all the time, and then your body will thank you for it. Like not stressing the same tissues in the same ways. I think that's a big one.
Yeah, well, it was funny because when I found Jeff Wolf's stuff and he was doing the Jefferson curls, that is actually what reversed like years and years and years of my back pain was just finally doing something where I flex my spine. And like that's just what my body was craving for literally 5 years. And I finally started doing it. And it was life changing, it was career changing. So yeah, there's just so much power to these ideas. Like people don't realize, like we say we have all these rules and the fitness industry, like whatever isms and jargon and cliches, and there's people on the receiving side of this who are suffering because of it. And so I think people like Jeff Wolf and McSaron and these guys who are just like questioning all these bad ideas about flexibility and movement, they're doing awesome work.
That's mad. Yeah. No, it's so good to see. And this is obviously quite different as we spoke earlier about what's typically taught or what's typically promoted in javelin. So this is, and then even in other throwing sports, like I feel like there's a friend of mine at the moment. He just threw 56 meters for discus, and he's trying to qualify, trying to get to the next round or next level. But this is not some of the things that's part of the program. It's and you look like discus or like hammer. Literally, your sport is literally requiring you to rotate. Like how well you can rotate is going to determine how good you're going to be at it. Obviously, there's a skill side of things, but the physical side, like if you're training and you're fairly strong, you don't you don't really need to like thrash those metrics too hard. Like some hammer throwers, there's another hammer thrower that I know, and he's just a crazy savage athlete. Loves being in the weight room. But yeah, this stuff is not really a part of their kind of their program. So it's crazy to see that. Yeah, that old school approach of just keep lifting, just keep going heavier, spend like an hour, I don't know, like an hour and a half at the track, just throw, and that'll be it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's crazy.
So talk to me about like the technique side of things, which I'm quite interested in. You've mentioned in some of your posts how you can't just like self-organize, like you can't just work it out. It's hard for people just to, like, I can give someone a barbell and say, cool, put the barbell here on your shoulders, do a front squat, just go up and down. And they can probably work it out. They can probably figure that position out. It's not that technical for them to be in. And although people might hate that, it's really not that technical. You can elevate their heels. They need to learn how to shift their center of mass back. It's really not that savage of a movement. So when someone's first learning javelin, what's your approach, or has your approach changed since you've kind of delved into this Darien bar mindset of like developing technique, focusing on these big rocks as you mentioned, like shin angles? How important is that in, if say I was to learn javelin, or someone was to learn this kind of thing, or be exposed to these thoughts? This is quite different from, say, like if you, I guess if you're coaching javelin, you've maybe been brought up with it, or you threw it in college, or you did it when you were younger. So you kind of like, it's very closed in terms of like the skill itself. No one's going out there to just like learn javelin. It's just, it's not like
Yeah.
a random hobby you have. It's definitely from like that athlete perspective. So what's that process look like for you, like learning and developing that first, like emerging that coordination pattern?
Yeah. So the first big thing with like what you had mentioned about kind of just like self organization with the throw or technique in general is um, that makes the assumption that athletes are just like already a blank slate and don't have bad cues in their head already. So like you think about something like a squat, just in general, like the athlete probably thinks they have to shove their knees out and you know pull the floor apart and whatever other, don't let their knees go over their toes. So it's like just with what's already in their head, if they try to self-organize with that self-organization doesn't exist because they already have these seeds planted. And then even off that, well, I mean, it's similar to that, but above like what your technique looks like is this kind of overarching technical model that you envision. So it's like what you think the throw needs to look like is going to impact what your throw looks like. And again, it's goes back to this idea like athletes aren't blank slates. They have an idea of what they're trying to do. They're not, maybe some athletes like in a meet, they're literally just like blacked out in their head and they're not thinking about anything. Um, but every athlete they have these ideas of what they're trying to do, and so you need to come up with a technical model and work through it together with them, based on uh, just a really coherent understanding of just like the physics of the event. You mentioned Darian Barr. The big thing that I took away from him is just watching what the best athletes do is the best way to learn the sport. A lot of people say that that's stupid, that the best athletes are exceptions and you shouldn't try to model yourself after somebody who's at the highest level. You should model yourself after somebody who's at the same level as you. um, but in my mind it's like the technical model, the ideal technical model that you want is something that you should start developing like ASAP, because it's not just about what the technique looks like. It's about these overarching principles of movement and your body according to the laws of physics. So, um, as far as actual throwing goes, like I have a handful of like really specific kind of like universal cues that I'll use with a lot of my throwers. I say, you want to have a squatty ball of foot back foot contact with your left arm reaching long and straight in the direction of the throw, which isn't really a cue, but it's a concept, it's a principle. And from that principle, we can break it down into drills where we work on it and develop, just the general motor control and coordination and positioning and strength of, that position. Um, I say kind of time the torque with the collision. You want to rotate into the throw, not after the throw. So don't stay closed. You want to hit this specific position at this specific time. Um, and so I have those kind of universal cues or concepts, but every athlete's still an individual. Every athlete, they're going to manifest differently across different athletes. Um, so that's kind of like the athlete is always going to individualize the technique anyway. So you don't have to individualize the technique to the athlete. Like something I've kind of, my favorite way of explaining it is just that like your individuality as an athlete stems 99% from your weaknesses as an athlete, not your strengths. Because if you're a javelin thrower, why don't you throw with the same technique as the world record holder? It's because you can. you're not physically capable of throwing with the same technique as the world record holder. But so why don't you train to achieve the same physical qualities that allow you to then intentionally piece together the same technique as the world record holder, right? What are the qualities that you lack that he has that can't be trained? It's all trainable. So why don't you train it? And just seeing that line of connection between your ideal technical model, the little bite-sized drills that kind of build up to that, and then the physical capacity to be able to do those things. It's just that line of connection between the physical side of things, the skill side of things, and then that all manifesting into technique. That's kind of the progression that I think about. It's not necessarily a progression because it's all happening simultaneously, but it's just that thread of logic where you think about like transfer of training. It's like there's multiple levels of transfer of training. It's not just about the physical side of things. And so it's like you can do, quote unquote, you can do everything right, but if you're applying it all to a faulty technical model, then you're still going to suck, right? And so then it's like, then where did things go wrong if you did everything right? It's about how you conceptualize the throw. So I feel like it's definitely a loaded question to think about, but I think a lot of people kind of look at it the wrong way.
Yeah, you answered it all. No, I think you answered it awesome. The when you look at say we're looking at, if we're looking at the elite lifters, the elite athletes. I'm talking about lifters, the elite throwers. Is there variances in that high level? Like, say, like someone might use their hips more, someone might use their arm more. Is there kind of that? There might be those principles like you've mentioned before, like that layback position might look quite similar, but then how they get there or their timing might be slightly different. Some of them might have like a way faster run up, or some of them might have like, they might be quite bouncy as they run up. Is there variances in that at that high level?
Yeah, so that relates to kind of what I'm saying with
Like
how
that individuality.
the the individuality is going to stem from the physical capacity, but
Mm,
the technical principles are all still there. So
yeah.
every top level thrower is going to hit a squatty ball of foot back foot contact with their left arm in place, but their in place might look a little bit different from thrower to thrower. And then when they rotate into their block, I say you don't hit your block until your end range of hip rotation. But if you have more hip rotation available, if you're a thrower who's really mobile, then you're going to hit an extreme throwing position where maybe the coach might say that athlete's over rotating, but they're not over rotating. They just have more rotation that they can access. Compared to a stiffer thrower, they might just look a little bit more neutral through their throw and release. And then even through their approach, like their approach, right? How bouncy are you on your feet? How mobile are you through your hips? Like those all dictate, what your form looks like. But it's still this idea of, right, you're staying on the balls of your feet, you're accelerating all the way through the penultimate step. You hit the squatty ball of foot, back foot contact with your left arm in place, and then you time your hip rotation with release and keep a totally relaxed arm, and that's it. But I'm not saying, put your arm exactly there, put your arm exactly here. It's like, no,
No.
but these technical principles are the same for every thrower. You're not special. You just can't achieve that yet. So develop that.
Yeah, that's so true. So yeah, there's in weightlifting, there's the old school, or even like there's a lot of the new school coaches who love to be G'd up and parrot the old school coaches, but their perception of the technique, like you said, what they believe the ideal to be is in their head. They have their own technical model, like I call it like they're small worlds. They live in small worlds where there's the solutions abound and there's only so many possibilities. So if they see someone outside those models, they're like, no, that person's an outlier. That's not how it's going to be achieved. Like that's not real. That's not how it's meant to be done. Like if someone in weightlifting, if someone uses their arms, if they bend their arm early, oh man, it's like, nah, all power's gone. It's like, no, they're interacting with it to keep it close. Like they're going to be more effective in the later phases of propulsion. So like there's a huge disconnect with that. And I think you do a really good job of making it quite simple. And I don't even know much about, I don't know anything about javelin. I've done like little athletics and I've thrown javelin like a little bit. And yeah, you do a really good job of breaking that down and breaking that dogma down. And I can see how it transfers to a lot of sports. So if people are wanting to tap into that and question their own models, I think you make it quite easy to understand all that.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I think it's funny because you just reminded me. I think I put up a poll on my Instagram story maybe a year ago, and there was a video of it was a 91-meter thrower. He has the Olympic record still, I think. But it was a video of his 91-meter throw, and I said, okay, if he were to stay close, stay tall, and keep his eyes up towards the vantage point, would he have thrown 95 meters? And it was literally split 50-50. It's like 50% of the people said yes, he would throw further. But I'm like, in my mind, it's like, do you really think that the three cues that you first learned on day one of javelin throwing are the thing that's stopping the Olympic record holder from throwing for it? Like, come on.
I
But I
remember
remember,
you
I think
putting that post up. Yeah, I
I
don't think
remember
I
you
voted,
actually
but yeah.
commented on that.
Oh,
Yeah.
oh, did I comment on it? Oh,
Yeah, yeah, you did.
oh. Yeah, I was like, well, there you go. Because I remember seeing it and I was like, what the fuck is wrong with people? Like, dude, like if you really think like this is the other thing where it's like refining that technique, like, do you really think that that one cue is going to, if anything, focusing more on that side of thing is probably going to reduce your performance? Like if that person's like that elite athlete, and we assume that our our feedback has so much power. Like we assume that like what we say is like they've never heard it before. Like you think that they haven't thought of that?
Right.
Like that's the other crazy part. It's like they're literally doing something that no one else has done before, and you think that they haven't thought of that before. Like you feel
Yeah.
so special. It's fucking crazy that concept. Like yeah, like I think coaches need to be more self-aware. The final part that I want to touch on is so with the changes in with the mobility and with these other concepts, how has the specific, because I know this may have changed. This is a change for me, as far as like minimum effective dose. How has the javelin sessions changed? So like have the from like what's traditionally done. So you might just like an hour of just throw, from like a 3-step approach from like 5. I don't know how it's normally done, but how has that changed for you? Are you trying to use more variations inside the javelin session? Are you going to be like, are you getting them to warm up with maybe a ball or a different implement and then get them to then throw the javelin last? I think I've seen some constraints where you had someone sitting down, like you just kind of going through, like not you specifically doing the drill, but it was more just like you showing a different athlete kind of throw seated. Is what kind of constraints or variations are you using in the sessions, and how has that changed? Obviously, as your understanding as a coach has evolved.
Yeah, so the biggest thing that's changed is just the level of intention that every drill has. Um, right. In my opinion, the biggest mistake most throwers and coaches make is just throwing for the sake of repetition. Every throw needs to have a purpose. Um, and so coming up with drills that specifically touch on very specific aspects of the throw, even if it is kind of like intangible aspects, like how do you measure rhythm? How do you measure acceleration? Well, you really can't, but you can still come up with drills that challenge it in different ways. So like for me, most throwers are gonna go through a progression of actually kind of learning, in my opinion, what like a really solid throwing motion is. A lot of throwers um, will kind of muscle the throw, or they don't necessarily understand what it means to quote unquote pull with the body. So I have a series of drills centered around that that'll kind of run them through just as like an initial learning phase. And then once they're actually like on the runway throwing, I think the biggest thing that I focus on is right just accumulating like sub maximal repetition. Right, not everything has to be like maximal intent. It's kind of at that 70% effort level where you really develop that ability to stay relaxed. It gives you just a little bit of wiggle room to focus on positions or rhythm or whatever the thing is that you're focusing on. It just gives you that extra margin in your mind to just kind of be intentional about your throws.
Is that
But yeah, and
typically like
then
previously with your training? Was it a lot of like just fucking like throw hard? Like I think what is it in baseball? It's like a lot of drive line. It's just like oh, let me put the
yeah,
radar gun. It's like go again, try and beat it. It's
yeah.
obviously like trying to tone it down a little bit and be more relaxed, be more present, throw, maybe work on one cue.
Exactly. And, you know, just I know throughout my college career, and I know it's still, there's a lot of college stars who are go through this with their coaches still. They just, their practices are literally just, okay, you have an hour on the runway, just throw. And it's like, okay, well, what do I do with that? I don't know what to do with that instruction. Um, so yeah, just like laying out your sessions with, you know, very intentional drilling progressions, whatever. And then just being really, really mindful about volume. I think a lot of throwers do way too much than they're capable of handling, which part of that is just ripping full throws at 110% effort every time. I think that's part of it, but just being mindful of like how your arm feels and managing that in terms of volume and intensity, and building a strong base of submaximal throws before trying to rip throws is massive. But then there's also throwers who kind of just arbitrarily cut their sessions short, and it's like if you develop just kind of that the ability to withstand more repetition, you should use that, right? Getting more repetition in is the name of the game when it comes to developing a tactical skill. So kind of just like, you know, broadening, developing a little bit more breadth with how I approach a training session. It's not just one size fits all. It's meet the athlete where they're at. I think that's definitely the biggest shift that I've made just progressively over the last few years. Um, yeah, I think that pretty much covers it. I'm trying to think of what else, but
Would they warm up with some of those mobility drills before you get them to start? Like, would you ever get them to? I think you mentioned like that Ido Portal. Am I saying that right? Like the thrower stretch? Is that the one you mentioned earlier? Will you get them to like
yeah,
warm up with some of that stuff before they start throwing? Is that a big part of the preparation, or is that like I know you mentioned like the javelin sessions are the javelin sessions, but do you find like getting them to do that can be quite effective, or is that how you're kind of structuring it, or like just doing like a bit of
um,
arm care after the sessions?
yeah. Generally, the warm up is just gonna be, you know, the standard dynamic one. Whatever the athlete feels like they
Mm.
need to do mobility stuff. You know, just kind of start with that. But the end goal is to get to that level of mobility where you kind of can just go into your throw session and build up your session very incrementally, like ramp up through the session. Um, where I think some athletes kind of it's not that they overdo it with the warm up, but they don't need to do as much as they think they do and kind of psych themselves out when they get to a meet and they only have like 10 minutes to warm up or something. So you developing that ability to just right warm up with using picks and some javelin stretches and a dynamic warm, a little jog, you're good. And then the session itself is a ramp up. So you start with one crossover throws, then you go to three crossover throws, and then you slowly back it up. So, um, but again, part of that is listening to your body. If that's not going to work for you that day, then so it's just individuality, right? I think like the biggest thing is just to remember like what is your big long-term goal that you're working towards, and don't get too caught up in the ebbs and flows of your track season. When you play the long game, when you find sustainability within your career, when you train in a way that makes you feel healthy, feel good, feel excited and not burnt out, you're setting yourself up for so much more success. So I know there's going to be a lot of throwers right now who, you know, maybe they aren't happy with how their season's going. It's always a learning experience. Play the long game, right? Don't destroy your body or your health or mental health to try to eke out a few more meters. It's like just stick with it, stay patient. Like you'll be good. But come up with a plan, come up with the action plan, and just continue your long term development.
That's awesome, man. Where can people find more about what you do, the products that you have? And I feel like everyone can get something out of what you offer. Like it doesn't matter. You don't have to be like for me as a weightlifting coach, you don't have to be a javelin coach to learn about your technical model or like the technical principles. I think everyone should have a really sound understanding of like what technical principles are, and then how to integrate that with the mobility products that you have.
Yeah, so I have everything just on my Instagram page. The biggest thing that I think everybody can benefit from my mobility program, which I just updated that. I kind of released a new version. I put it into training app form. So instead of just a standalone program that you follow for 3 months, it's an ongoing, right? It's updated weekly with new workouts every week. And I released the original program 2.5 years ago. So with this new update, it's like 2.5 years of everything that I've learned since then is now being included. So it's a lot, right? New exercises, new programming strategies. It's awesome stuff, and the app is awesome. So that's probably the biggest thing that I'm excited about right now.
Is that your own app that you built, or is that
No, it's done through TrueCoach. Have you
True
ever
Coach? Yeah,
used?
yeah, yeah.
Yep, it's awesome. So yeah, it's done through TrueCoach, and um, but you can find that just on Instagram through the link in my bio. But besides that, I have everything on Instagram. Lots of stuff. I have some articles that I've written and podcasts that I've done. But yeah, you can definitely find a lot of info through that.
Awesome, man. Thanks so much, Kevin, for taking the time to come on the podcast. And I'm looking forward to seeing what the feedback's like on this episode. And I'm interested to chat more to you in the future.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Brandon. It's awesome.